Grace, peace, and mercy all. This is Chris Halverson, pastor of Spruce Run Lutheran here in Glen Gardner, New Jersey. I'm here with another Ask the Pastor. So the question is, what are the major differences that Lutherans have with other denominations? So sort of what is the Lutheran distinctive or distinctives? So on one hand, I would recommend that you all go back through to the Lutheranism in a Nutshell videos that I had. I think those are really good guideposts for that. But probably the two that come to mind off the bat are the ubiquity of Christ and the theology of the cross. So the theology of the cross is one of those that you can look back to on the Lutheranism in a Nutshell videos. But theology of the cross, but at base is looking for God in the last place you would think to look, just recognizing that God's incarnation in Jesus Christ, who is killed by the powerful and by the religious, does make Lutherans really reflect strongly on those two veins in all sort of religious impulse, right? That religion and power have a tendency to make the faith go a little funny. Avoiding crucifying Christ. But the other one that I don't think, talked about to this point is the ubiquity of Christ. So this is a big one. So majority of Protestantism, right, in one way or another, sort of floats along a Calvinist kind of way of thinking about what it means that Jesus is at the right hand of God. And they take it in a somewhat literally spatial sense, right, that Jesus is literally hanging out up in heaven with his Father. Right, which, plain reading of the text, right, that seems to make a bit of sense. After all, he ascends to heaven in, both Acts and in Luke. Okay, that's a thing. But, and then that has implications, right, because that's an assumption. Then how communion works, I guess that's the example that I always run into, is kind of a particular thing for that all those branches of Protestantism that fit within a Calvinist mold, which is pretty much everybody in one way or another, right? So majority of Protestants fit into that, making the assumption that when Jesus ascended into heaven, he is literally at the right hand of God and kind of, in a sense, stuck in heaven until the end of ages, right? So that means for Holy Communion that it has to be symbolic, because Jesus can't literally be in the bread and wine because he's up in heaven, right? So that's majority take for Protestant Christians. Lutherans, on the other hand, make a very different assumption. We assume that the doctrine of the ubiquity of Christ, which ubiquity means everywhere, right? So that Jesus is everywhere. Essentially, when we hear that Jesus is at the right hand of God, we say, well, throughout Scripture, when it talks about the right hand of God, what are they saying? Are they literally, meaning there's a right hand of God doing a thing, right? Because if you read Exodus very literally, God's hand literally plunks down and leads people on, right? Which is, as Lutherans, we say, oh no, that's, it's poetry, right? And so what's the poetic sense of the right hand of God? It's that it's God's power, right? God's might, God's ability to do things in the world. And so, if Jesus is at the right hand of God, and you understand it that way, then all of a sudden, one of the major things about God, and sort of the powerful thing about God, is God's ubiquity, that God is everywhere, right? The creation that God has made is infused and sort of saturated with God. So if that's the case, right, and Jesus now, being at the right hand of God, is able to saturate the world seen and unseen, right? That changes things. And specifically, what does that say about Holy Communion? Jesus can show up wherever he darn well pleases, right? So, and that's something we, of course, see in the Gospels, right? He walks through walls on the other side of the resurrection. He shows up kind of in one form and then breaks bread and bam, wait, that's Jesus, right? Road to Emmaus. Yeah, so the idea that Jesus can show up wherever he wants to, and if he promises to show up in bread and wine, and he does, then that means he's going to show up in bread and wine because he can show up wherever he wants to, wherever he is, called to. For that matter, Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. So, that would kind of suggest, again, sort of on the Lutheran end of things, that, well, that can't mean that Jesus is stuck at the right hand of God up in heaven somewhere, right? Because if that's the case, then 2 or 3 are gathered here, and he's stuck up here. There's this grand division between heaven and earth. But if Christ is ubiquitous, which Lutherans believe he is, then it makes sense that when 2 or 3 are gathered, in fact, Jesus is there among us. When we say, this is my body, this is my blood, right, shed for you, Jesus is really there. Jesus is really present because he is ubiquitous. So that's, just 2 quick things to think about. Ubiquity of Christ, theology of the cross. I hope that's helpful. Those are 2 Lutheran distinctives. But as I said, please go back to the Lutheranism in a Nutshell videos, and they will sort of say a lot more about this question. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you have a great day. God bless. Bye.